Is action bias destroying your life? Is action bias affecting you in a negative way? What is action bias? And can action bias be a good thing? Can it be a bad thing? Or can it be a combination of both? Let's quickly go into the intro. So remember, this is education mixed with entertainment. So with that being said, let's analyze this train of thought accordingly. So, action bias. Now, as you know, we like to ask questions around here. So let's start off by defining action bias. Now I've got my iPad with me, and I've written just a really quick definition, which is action bias is where people tend to favor action over inaction. And then in brackets, I have it's a reflection, or it can oppose rational thinking. I'm not sure about that, but let's stick with the first phase of that. So where people tend to favor action over inaction, let's say that's phase one. And phase two, it's a reflex, and it could be opposed to rational thinking. So let's start off positive. Can action bias be a good thing? Here's an argument for action bias being a good thing. So imagine you have like a New Year's resolution and you want to get in shape. And part of getting in shape, I guess there's more than this, but let's identify two main elements of getting in shape, or what some people would say getting in good shape or toned or etc. So I would say one of those things is diet, and the other part is having some form of training regime that would probably mix cardio and weights. So action bias in this context would be to start with the diet and to start with the training. So in this situation, action bias is a good thing, because procrastination will only mean that you delay progress. So within the training context, assuming you have the right strategy or a decent strategy, action bias would be good. Let's give another example. Starting a business. Now, starting a business, if you procrastinate on starting a business, it may be beneficial, but it may also not be beneficial, because in my experience, when you're doing a business, you're not going to have the full understanding of your problems until you start it. So if you take action bias and you're like, right, I'm starting the business this week, or I'm starting it this month, problems will start to arise. And then because you've started, you'll be able to identify the problems, and assuming that you believe in solutions, you can then start to formulate potential solutions and then implement those solutions, and then you should be further in your journey. So that's another situation. So far we've got training and we've got a business. That would be beneficial for action bias. What else? Starting a YouTube channel. You hear lots of you hear all this advice about, you should start, just start. It's not going to be perfect. And I think that there may be some validity there. Because if you start, again, similar to a business, and YouTube can be a business, but it can also be a hobby. It can be multifaceted, I guess. If you start, again, you will identify that there may be some issues. You might have poor audio, or you might have bad sound, or you might not have a good script, or you might not be as comfortable in front of the camera as you thought you would be. So you're identifying, again, problems. And assuming that you're a solution-focused person, the quicker you identify the problem is the quicker you can start formulating a solution. And of course, there's two phases here. You formulate a solution, or you identify a problem. So 3 phases: identify a problem, formulate a theoretical solution, that's number 2, and then number 3, implement that theoretical solution. And I guess number 4, then you review it accordingly. So these are arguments that action bias is a good thing. But as I've got in my notes, can action bias be a bad thing? What do you think? Can it be a bad thing? So here are some examples where maybe it's a bad thing, and I've written this. So customer service management. So imagine if you're like I don't know, let's say you're running a restaurant and generally you're getting all these good reviews. Let's say you have 100 reviews and 98 are positive, and then you get 2 negative reviews, and then you implement a change based on that negative review. You could argue that that would be action bias, because you're instead of sitting back, you're just reacting. You're reacting to these 2 negative reviews. But if those 2 negative reviews counteract those 98 positive reviews, then that action bias may be actually detrimental to your business. Now, let's quick caveat that doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to feedback. Of course, you should listen to feedback. But if you balance it up strategically, 98 viewpoints against 2, that's good. Of course, if I was running some type of food company or some type of restaurant and I had consistent feedback about the customer service and about the food quality, then I would adhere to address those problems. But action bias on just, well, in that context where you got the small minimal percentage, could negatively affect your business. And sometimes maybe what would be better is to actually strategically think about it and think, okay, I got 98 good reviews, 2 bad reviews. Are these reviews credible? Even if they are credible, the majority prefer what I'm doing. Do I need to do something? Do I need to physically make changes, or do I need to be strategic? Can I accommodate the problems of the 2 reviews but still keep the other 98 people happy? So action bias in this context may be bad. Another example is investing. So an investor who's frequently buying and selling and just frequently being active and believing that the activity, that the action taken is going to be beneficial to the investor as opposed to making better decisions. So not that investing is my thing, but I would assume that investing in the right company would be the effective way to make money as opposed to just taking action. So again, an investor who's saying, okay, I've got to be busy because that makes me feel good, and being busy can be good. Discipline is a good thing. But if you're just being busy for the sake of it, you could be making a sequence of bad decisions, and action bias in that context could be bad. Here's another context, and obviously we've had the big fight between Tyson Fury and Usyk. Great fight, by the way. So let's give the boxing context. And a boxer, it's important, mostly when there are instances where a boxer does bad, and maybe part of doing bad is not training enough. So maybe they've underestimated their opponent and they don't turn up to training. Maybe now they're a millionaire, they feel content and they don't have that burning desire. But then there's a question, can you overtrain? And clearly the answer to that is yes. And a domino effect of overtraining could be causing an injury or actually hindering your performance. So in boxing, there's a point where you want to peak just at the time of the fight. So if you overtrain, and overtraining in this context would be action bias, then you could peak too soon. And if you peak too soon, this could hinder your performance on the night. So you might be, the logic here would be, let's say if you're training 3 hours a day, and then you could think, well, if I'm getting these results on 3 hours a day, let me train 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day. And that type of action bias would be detrimental. So also there's another thing here, and I think there's a relationship between your rational thinking and your action bias. So let's think of it as a relationship. And if your action bias is compromising your rational thinking, again, the premise here is that I'm assuming you can think rationally. If it compromises that relationship, again, you should think, do I need to think this through? I just wrote down a little definition of what rational thinking is, which is the quality of being guided based on reason. So if it's compromising that, then it can be negative. Let's talk another thing, and I think a lot of us can relate to this. In life, we take different paths, whether it be the people that we love, but specifically the career path. So let's say if there's hundreds of different career paths, and you think, okay, there's different paths to take. Hopefully we can identify that there's different paths to take, but we're trying to find the right path. And I guess there's this question where if you're utilizing action bias in a negative way, does that force you to choose a path as opposed to finding the right path? And one would assume that rational thinking would be a better way, or maybe a clearer way, or give you a greater opportunity in finding the right path. So if action bias can compromise this, then again, action bias becomes a negative thing. This stimulates other questions in terms of how do we find the right path, and what is the right path, what is the wrong path. In terms of when we're talking within the career context, in my experience, the right path isn't always money. It's not always money orientated. You could find a job that pays really well, but it has a really bad culture, or maybe you have a really bad manager. So you're making a significant amount of money, but because of the culture and because of the relationship with the manager or the relationship with the team, it's the wrong path. Alternatively, which we would call a lose-lose, you could get paid poorly, have a poor relationship with your manager, and then have a poor culture as well. That would be really bad. So, but I'm deflecting a little bit. But I think action bias, for me, in most contexts, is good because we need to take action. But the question I pose to myself, and the question I may pose to you, is that if your action bias is compromising your rational thinking, then maybe you need to step back. And as always, I would encourage people, because I want people to think as opposed to telling people what to think. Define action bias. Think about action bias within the context of your own life. Maybe you need to utilize action bias because, as we've shown, action bias can be a good thing. Think about the training regime, the starting a business, starting a YouTube channel. But maybe you might look at your life, and maybe action bias might be holding you back. Maybe it's compromising your rational thinking, which is compromising your personal relationships, your professional relationships. And if that's the case, you've identified that problem, and now you need to try and identify a solution. So I think we'll end it there. So with that being said, I sincerely hope this video has provided value.